we're back looking at Glenn Greenwald's article. I'm going to continue from here. The only thing here that's false and irresponsible is Hennessy's attempt to deceive the public about the domestic spying powers of her former employer. And many other people beyond Rand Paul have long made clear just how misleading Hennessy's claim is. Ted Lieu, the liberal congressman from California, has made it one of his priorities to stop the very power Hennessy and her IC colleagues pretend does not exist: warrantless spying on Americans. The 2008 FISA law that authorized it is set to expire this year, and this is what Lieu tweeted last week about his efforts to repeal that portion of it. So Ted Lieu tweeted out, Section 702 of FISA allows warrantless searches on Americans. That's unconstitutional and must be changed. So he has an article, and then we go on. And in response to the IC attacks on Paul on Sunday, Lieu explained, Section 702 of FISA allows IC to capture info on U.S. citizens without a warrant and has that used in court. We need to reform it. As Lieu says, the 2008 FISA law explicitly allows NSA, without a warrant, to listen to Americans' calls or read their emails with foreign nationals as long as their intent is to target the foreigner, not the American. Hennessy's defense is true only in the narrowest and emptiest theoretical sense, that the statute bars the practice of, quote, reverse targeting, where the real intent of targeting a foreign nationalist to monitor what Americans are saying. But the law was designed and is now routinely used for exactly that outcome. How do we know that a key purpose of the 2008 law is to allow the NSA to purposely monitor Americans' communications without a warrant? Because the NSA and other national security officials said so explicitly. This is how Jamil Jaffer, then of the ACLU, put it in 2013, quote, on its face, the 2008 law gives the government authority to engage in surveillance directed at people outside the United States. In the course of conducting that surveillance, though, the government inevitably sweeps up the communications of many Americans. The government often says that this surveillance of American communications is incidental, which makes it sound like the NSA's surveillance of American phone calls and emails is inadvertent and even from the government's perspective regrettable. But when Bush administration officials asked Congress for this new surveillance power, they said quite explicitly that Americans' communications were the communications of most interest to them. See, for example, FISA for the 21st century, hearing before the Senate Committee on the Judiciary, 109th Congress, 2006, statement of Michael Hayden, stating in debate preceding passage of FAA's predecessor statute that certain communications, quote, with one end in the United States are the ones that are the most important to us. The principal purpose of the 2008 law was to make it possible for the government to collect Americans' international communications and to collect those communications without interference to whether any partly to those communications was doing anything illegal. And a lot of the government's advocacy is meant to obscure this fact, but it's a crucial one. The government doesn't need to target Americans in order to collect huge volumes of their communications. So, during debate over the 2008 law, the White House repeatedly issued veto threats over proposed amendments from then Senator Russ Feingold and others to weaken NSA's abilities to use the law to monitor American communications without warrants, because enabling such warrantless eavesdropping powers was, as they themselves said, a prime objective of the new law. When the ACLU's Jaffer appeared in 2014 before the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board to argue that the 2008 FISA law was unconstitutional in terms of how it was written and how NSA exploits it, he made clear exactly how NSA conducts, quote, backdoor warrantless searches of Americans' communications despite the bar on reverse targeting. So some of that highlighted from that act. The act is designed to allow the government to conduct large-scale warrantless surveillance of those communications, and the FAA authorizes the government to conduct surveillance of foreign targets. Again, targets who need not be suspected foreign agents, but who may be attorneys, human rights researchers, or journalists, with the specific purpose of learning the substance of those targets' communications with Americans. So, those who actually work to protect Americans' privacy rights and other civil liberties have been warning for years that the NSA is able to purposely monitor Americans' communications without warrants. Human Rights Watch has warned that, quote, in reality, the law allows the agency to capture potentially vast numbers of Americans' communications with people overseas, and thus currently underpins some of the most sweeping warrantless NSA surveillance programs that affect Americans and people across the globe. And Marcy Wheeler, in response to Hennessy's misleading claim on Sunday, correctly said, I can point to court documents and congressional claims. The entire point of 702 of the 2008 FISA law is to ID convos involving Americans. Elizabeth Goitein, the co-director of the Liberty and National Security Program at the Brennan Center for Justice, warned in the Boston Review that the ban on reverse targeting was a farce. In fact, the program tolerates and even contemplates a massive amount of collection of Americans' telephone calls, emails, and other electronic communications. Thus, she explains, it is likely that the Americans' communications comprise a significant portion of the 250 million internet transactions and undisclosed number of telephone conversations intercepted each year without a warrant or showing of probable cause. Even more alarming is the power NSA now has to search the immense amount of Americans' communications data it routinely collects without a warrant. As Goitein explained, quote, the government may intentionally search for this information even though it would have been illegal under Section 702's reverse targeting prohibition for the government to have such intent all the time at the time of collection, end quote. Uh, in the wake of controversy triggered by Trump's accusations about Obama's tapping his phones, Goitein wrote a new article explaining that there are numerous ways the government could have spied on the communications of Trump or any American without a warrant. She emphasized the quote that quote there have long been concerns on both the right and the left that the legal constraints of foreign intelligence surveillance contain too many loopholes that can be exploited to access information about Americans without judicial oversight or evidence of wrongdoing. This is what Rand Paul meant when he said on Sunday that, quote, because NSA analysts have too much data, they can type Donald Trump into their vast resources of people they are tapping overseas, and they get all of his phone calls. And while, as I've argued previously, any leak that reveal lying by officials are criminal yet justified even if they come from the CIA or NSA, Paul is also correct that these domestic warrantless eavesdropping powers vest the deep state, or if you naively prefer, our noble civil servants, with menacing powers against even the highest elected officials. The warrantless gathering and searching of vast amounts of communications data essentially becomes a dossier that can be used even against domestic opponents. This is what Snowden meant in his much maligned but absolutely true statement in his first interview with us back in 2013 that, quote, I, sitting at my desk, could wiretap anyone, from you or your accountant to a federal judge or even the president, even if I had a personal email. As Paul put it on Face the Nation, quote, it is very dangerous because they are revealing that now to the public, end quote. That's a serious concern no matter how happy one might be to see Donald Trump damaged or how much one now adores the intelligence agency. Congress has now begun debating whether to allow these provisions of the 2008 law to expire at the end of the year, whether to meaningfully reform them or whether to let them be renewed again. The post 9/11 history has been that once even temporary measures such as the Patriot Act are enacted, they become permanent fixtures on our political landscape. Perhaps the growing recognition that nobody is immune from such abusive powers will finally reverse the tide. Those eager to preserve these domestic surveillance powers in these maximalist states rely on the state tactic that has worked so well for them for 15 years now: rank disinformation. If nothing else, this debate ought to finally obliterate that pleasing though utterly false myth that the U.S. government does not and cannot spy on American communications without warrants. It does so constantly, easily, deliberately, and by design. So that's from Glenn Greenwald. Uh, and so now, this last part, we're going to look at Consortium News, an article by Ray McGovern. Uh, German intel clears Russia on interference. So we're going from the CIA actively spying on Americans to the governments around the world showing that Russia played no part in any type of hacking. Exclusive. Mainstream U.S. media only wants stories of uh, Russian perfidy. So when German intelligence cleared Moscow of suspected subversion of German democracy, the silence was deafening, says ex-CIA analyst Ray McGovern. After a multi-month politically charged investigation, German intelligence agencies could find no good evidence of Moscow-directed cyber attacks or a disinformation campaign aimed at subverting the democratic process in Germany. Uh, Undaunted Chancellor Angela Merkel has commissioned a new investigation. Last year, Berlin's two main intelligence agencies, the BND and BFD, counterparts of the CIA and FBI, launched a joint investigation to substantiate allegations that Russia was meddling in German political affairs and attempting to shape the outcome of Germany's elections next September. Like the vast majority of Americans, uh, malnourished on mainstream news, most Germans have been led to believe that by hacking and propaganda, the Kremlin interfered in the recent U.S. election and helped Donald Trump become the president. Uh, German intelligence agencies rarely bite the hand that feeds them and realize that the most bountiful part of the trough is at the CIA station in Berlin, with ultimate guidance coming from the CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. But this time, in an unusual departure from the past practice, analysts at the BND and BFV decided to act like responsible adults. Whereas former CIA Director John Brennan prevailed on his analysts to resort to anemic, evidence-light reasoning assessing that Russia tried to trip the U.S. election to Donald Trump, Berlin's intelligence agencies found the evidence lacking and have now completed their investigation. Better still, the conclusions have been reported in a mainstream German newspaper, apparently because the patriotic insider thought the German people should also know. Uh, Lemmings no longer. In BND, if BND President Bruno Kahl thought that his own analysts could be depended upon to follow their American counterparts lemming like and find evidence, curveball style, to support the U.S. allegations, he now has had a rude awakening. When the joint investigation was underway, with his analysts doing their best to come up with reliable evidence of Russian perfidy, Kahl had behaved like his BND predecessors, parroting the charges made by the CIA counterpart that the Russians were fomenting uncertainty and instability in Germany and elsewhere in Europe. In a rare interview with the mainstream newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung, on November 28, 2016, Kahl went out on what he probably thought was a safe limb, denouncing this subversive interference by the Russians, as they did in the U.S. He was just a few months into his job, and may have been naive enough to consider what John Brennan said as gospel truth. If he really is that gullible, Call is in the wrong profession. In the interview, Call played the puppet doll Charlie McCarthy with Brennan in the role of Charlie's ventriloquist Edgar Bergen. Call told the Süddeutsche uh, that he agreed with the U.S. intelligence assessment that the Kremlin was behind the cyber attacks aimed at influencing the U.S. election. He added, quote, "We know that cyber attacks are taking place and that they have no purpose other than to produce political instability. Not only that, the perpetrators are interested in delegitimizing the democratic process itself. I have the impression that the outcome of the American election has evoked no sadness in Russia so far. Europe is now the focus of these disruption experiments, in Germany especially. The pressure of the public discourse and on democracy is unsuccessful." So, does this sound familiar? Still, one might excuse the novice BND president for assuming his analysts would remember which side their bread is buttered on and follow past precedent in coming up with conclusions known to be desired by their masters in Berlin and the CIA. So it must have come as an unwelcome surprise to Call when he found out this time BND analysts would stand on principle and refuse to be as malleable as their Washington counterparts. His analysts could find no proof that the Kremlin was working hard to undermine the democratic process in Germany, and said so. Worse still, from the U.S. point of view, the two German intelligence agencies resisted the usual pressure from some senior leaders in Berlin, perhaps including Kohl himself, to jam whatever innocuous information they could find into the anti-Russian mosaic that Washington was constructing, a kind of cubist version of distorted reality. Uh, we're just going to get one little last part of this article before we end. So, what do powerful officials do when the bureaucracy comes up with the incorrect conclusions? They send the analysts and investigators back to work until they come up with the correct answers. This turned out to be no exception. Absent evidence of hacking directed by the Kremlin, the Germans now have opted for an approach by which information can be fudged more easily. According to Süddeutsche, quote, Chancellor Merkel's office has now ordered a new inquiry. Notably, a psychological operations group joint run by the BND and BFV will specifically look at Russian news agencies' coverage in Germany. Quote, or unquote. "We can expect that any articles that don't portray Vladimir Putin in a devil's costume will be judged as Russian propaganda." For guidance, Merkel may well give the new investigators a copy of the evidence-free CIA, FBI, NSA assessment, Russia's Influence Campaign Targeting the 2006 U.S. Presidential Election. Released on January 6th, the report was an eyesore and an embarrassment to serious intelligence professionals. The lame evidence presented, together with all the assessing indulged by the U.S. analyst, was unable to fill 5 pages. Filler was needed, preferably filler that could be made to look like analysis. And so even more pages were tacked onto the CIA, FBI, NSA assessment, even though the information presented in them had nothing to do with the cause célèbre of Russian hacking. No problem. The additional 7 pages bore the ominous title Annex A, Russia, Kremlin TV seeks to influence politics, fuel discontent in U.S. The extra pages, in turn, were then used to support the following indictment. Quote, Russia's state-run propaganda machine contributed to the influence campaign by serving as a platform for Kremlin messaging to Russian and international audiences. And the last part, did an insider leak? It is not clear how the German daily Süddeutsche acquired the conclusions of the joint investigation, or even whether it has the full 50-page copy of the final report. The newspaper did make it clear, though, that it's now realized it was played by Kohl with his unsupported accusations last November. From what the newspaper was told, the analyst seemed willing to give the boss what he had already declared to be his desired conclusion, but the evidence simply wasn't there. The article quotes one security expert saying, quote, "We would have been happy to give Russia a yellow card," a soccer metaphor referring to improper conduct. A cabinet source lamented, quote, "We found no smoking gun." Initially, the BND and BFV planned to release excerpts of their still classified inquiry, the Süddeutsche reported, but it's now clear, but it's now not clear when, if ever, the full report will be released. The day after the Süddeutsche story appeared, some other media outlets reported on it. Briefly, Newsweek and Politico gave the scoop all of 3 sentences each, not fitting with the preferred, quote, "Russia is guilty of everything" narrative. It then died a quick death. I have been unable to find the story mentioned at all in major U.S. mainstream media outlets. If Americans became aware of the story, it was probably via RT, the Bete Noir of the above mentioned CIA, FBI, and NSA report condemning Russian propaganda. Can it become any clearer why RT America and RT International are despised by the U.S. government and the mainstream media? Many Americans are slowly realizing they cannot count on American network and cable TV for accurate news and are tuning into RT at least for the other side of these important stories. It was from a early morning call from RT International that I first learned on February 7th. Süddeutsche report on Germany's failed hunt for evidence of Russian electoral interference. Okay, so what's happening in the United States with the corrupt media is happening all around the world, especially in Europe, especially in Germany, where neoliberals like Angela Merkel, who are the same thing as Barack Obama, who are again the same thing as Donald Trump, are trying to create these Russia narrative stories to distract from any type of opposition to Trump, because any type of real opposition to Trump means a huge opposition also to the Democrats and Obama and Angela Merkel and the fake progressives of the world. So all we're being given with this Russia story is more and more distraction from the fact that the United States is murdering millions of people abroad and at home for profit, and the mainstream media will never talk about that until we make them talk about it. So this is the importance of organizing an anti-war movement and a people's revolution in order to overthrow these people who have taken control of our press and our government and every form of our life. So this is what we need to do. We need to organize an anti-war movement and a people's revolution in order to stop this form of abuse that is smacking us in the face every day. So that's it for now. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and retweet, and follow, and do whatever to this video. My name is Sandy Frank, and I will see you in the